In a classroom, there are a lot of things that teachers do that unintentionally hinder or prevent learning. Here are some of the most popular techniques. But before we get started, here's a little joke for you. What is the most popular state to buy school supplies in? Pennsylvania. There are a lot of great ways that teachers can support and encourage students to learn, and to learn more autonomously, and to learn more fruitfully. But there are also a lot of things that teachers can do that hinder their learning. These are some of the most popular techniques, things that teachers do in their classroom that prevent students from learning to their full capacity. The first one is TTT, teacher talking time. Now imagine a teacher saying something like this. When nothing else is happening in the classroom, I open my mouth. I have no idea what I say most of the time, but it stops those horrible silences. It's probably useful for them to listen to me speaking English anyway. After all. And that teacher could go on and on and on. And sometimes they do. The more you talk, the less opportunity there is for the learners. They need time to think, to prepare what they're going to say and how they're going to say it. Allow them the time and the quiet that they need. Don't feel the need to fill every gap in a lesson. Explore the possibilities of silence. The next technique is echoing. You've probably heard this in your own classroom. A student says, I went to the cinema. And the teacher says, you went to the cinema? Good. You went to the cinema. Now, in this situation, who gets more language practice? The student or the teacher? If you become aware of your echoing and then start to control it, you'll find that learners get more talking time and that they start to listen to each other more. But when you echo, they'll soon learn that they don't need to listen to anyone except you, because they know that you'll repeat everything. That has a dramatically negative effect on interaction patterns within a classroom. The next technique that really sounds like a good idea, but is not, is helpful sentence completion. So a student might start off by saying something like, I think that smoking is, and a teacher jumps in and says, a bad thing. Yes, I agree. When I went into the pub, blah, 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 blah. You can be so desperate for a student to say what you want them to say that you're already predicting the words the student will produce and eagerly wishing for them to be said. So much so that you find yourself adding little tails to sentence after sentence. But this kind of doing the hard work for them is often counterproductive. People need to finish their own sentences. If students can't complete the sentence themselves, they need help. But help to produce their own sentence using their own words and their own ideas. By letting students finish what they are saying, you also allow yourself more time to really listen to the student and what they are saying. The next technique, and the one that I was probably most guilty of using, especially at the beginning of my career, is complicated and unclear instructions. You can imagine a teacher saying something like this. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to get into pairs. But before that, there are some things we've got to work out. So just jot down, if you got a pen, could you write this? Then when we're finished, we're going to go to the next thing, which involves, teachers spend a lot of time on their lesson plans, but often spend very little time on their lesson speak. Unplanned, unstructured instructions are extremely confusing to students. They probably only understand a small percentage of what you say. And guess what you want them to do from one or two key words that they did catch. Work out what is essential for them to know and tell them that, without wrapping it up in any babble. Another technique is not checking for understanding of instructions. Teachers will say something like, my instructions were so clear, but all of the students did different things, and none of them did what I asked them to do. Even the clearest instructions can be hard to grasp. So after you've given them, it's worth checking that they have been understood. A simple way is to ask a student or two to repeat them back to you. You might say, "So Brian, what are you going to do?" In this way, you satisfy yourself that the task has been understood. Having done that, make sure you monitor the start of the activity to see if they really do what you wanted, or if they're just placating you and nodding along. Another very similar technique to this is asking, "Do you understand?" In this situation, most students just say, "Yes." When you want to check learners' understandings, questions such as, "Do you understand?" they're often useless. If you get a yes reply, it could mean, "Yes, I'm nervous about seeming stupid," or "I don't want to waste the class's time anymore," or "I think I understand, but..." You often need to get clear information about what students have taken in. The best way to do this is to get students to demonstrate their understanding. For example, by using a language item in a sentence, or by repeating an instruction, or by explaining their interpretation of an idea. This provides real evidence, rather than vague and possibly untrue information. The next technique, and something that I'm sure every teacher has a little worry of, is the fear of genuine feedback. This is when a teacher asks students, "Well, what did you think of the lesson? Did you like my lesson?" And the students say, "Yes, teacher, we liked it." In an active, forward-moving class, the learners will be constantly giving you feedback on what they understood, what they think, and what they need. In addition, they'll be telling you about how they feel. Many teachers believe in the importance of open, honest feedback, but find that in practice, it can be hard to get. This is partly to do with the classroom atmosphere, partly to do with the questions asked, and mainly to do with the attitudes and response to feedback received. The more you see feedback as a threat to you and your position and your confidence, the more you'll attempt to avoid feedback. Or you'll end up defending yourself against these perceived attacks when you do get feedback. If you can open yourself up to the possibilities of really listening to what students have to say, with a view to simply hearing them, without self-defense or justification or arguments, then you may find that you can start to find out what they're really thinking, and that you can work on responding appropriately to that. A technique that really sets students up for failure, but a lot of friendly teachers try to implement, is insufficient authority or over-politeness. I find that young teachers, and especially young teachers who have not had a strong foundation in classroom management, sound something like this. "So if you don't mind, it would be very nice if you could just stop the activity, if that feels okay to you." This kind of pussyfooting is a common way in which teachers undermine themselves. Just be clear, be assertive, say what you need to say without hiding it. If you want to stop an activity, say, "Stop now, please." Feel your own natural authority and let it speak clearly. One of the most common and energy-consuming techniques that I see across the board is the running commentary, which just really wears out both the students and the teacher. A running commentary might sound like this. "So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move my chair over here and sit down, and I'm just going to get comfortable. And now I'm going to tear up this piece of paper, and I had to use these because I couldn't get any cards. So I found these at the back of the teacher's room," right? As you can hear, not only is a running commentary boring, hard to follow, and unnecessary, but you're giving students insight into the mechanics of a classroom that they don't need to know. So just stop. New teachers often fall prey to the lack of confidence. They lack confidence in themselves, in the learners, in the material, in the activity, in making it too easy. Teachers often think to themselves, "I wonder why they look so bored." And a common cause of boredom in the classroom is when the material used is too difficult or too easy. Now, the former isn't hard to recognize. The learners just can't do the work. A more difficult problem is when the work is simply not challenging enough. Teachers often have a rather limited expectation about what people can do, and they keep their classes on a rather predictable, straight line through activities that are safe and routine. Try to keep the level of challenge high. Be demanding. Believe that they can do more, and then they will do more. Overhelping or over-organizing is something that you can associate with like helicopter parenting. It's when a teacher says something like, "Yes, now you can ask her your question." That's a good question. What do you think? What is your answer going to be? Yes, go on, tell her what it is. When you give students a task to do in a group, it's often best to let them get on with it. A lot of teacher help, although well-intentioned, is actually teacher interference, and it gets in the way of students working on their own. As long as you are around, they'll look to you for guidance, control, and help. But if you go away, they're forced to do work for themselves. That is when learning might happen. Now, of course, it can be a difficult lesson to learn, but sometimes our students will do much better without us, if only we have the courage to trust them. In large classes, flying with the fastest is a technique that is really easy to fall into. This is when the teacher says, "Okay, so what's the answer?" And one student says, "Only on Tuesdays, unless it's raining." The teacher could say, "Oh yes, very good. So everyone's got that. And why did they buy the elastic band?" The same student answers, "So he wouldn't lose his letters." And the teacher thinks, "Good, everyone understands now." In large classes, flying with the fastest is a technique that is really easy to fall into. This is when the teacher says, "Okay, so what's the answer?" And one student says, "Only on Tuesdays, unless it's raining." The teacher could say, "Oh yes, very good. So everyone's got that. And why did they buy the elastic band?" The same student answers, "So he wouldn't lose his letters." And the teacher thinks, "Good, everyone understands now." If you only listen to the first people who speak, it's very easy to get a false impression of how difficult or how easy something is. You may find that the strongest and the fastest students dominate, and you get little idea of how the majority of the class finds the work. This can lead you to fly at the speed of the top 2 or 3 students, and to lose the rest completely. So make sure you get answers and feedback from many students. One way you can do this is by trying to direct questions at individuals, and sometimes actively shushing the loud ones, or simply, not hearing them and asking the question again. Excellent. Now, did anyone else's grandfather die last week? Of course, this is a little bit of an exaggerated example, but because we're dealing in language as the subject matter of our courses, it's very easy to be over-concerned about the accuracy of what is said and fail to hear what the person really means, what they're telling you. It's important to remember, the only point in learning language is to be able to communicate or receive communication. It is vital that work on mechanical production of correct English does not blind us to messages conveyed. Check yourself occasionally and ask yourself, are you really listening to your students or only to their words? And the final way that teachers can undermine learning is through weak rapport, right? The creation of a poor working environment. You've probably heard a teacher say this before. I try to be nice, but my classes always seem so dull, right? If you're like this teacher and rapport seems to be a problem, then plan work specifically designed to focus on improving the relationships and interactions within the class. Until the relationships are good within a class, the learning is likely to be of a lower quality, so it's worth spending some time on this. Bear in mind the 3 teacher qualities that help to enable a good working environment are authenticity, respect, and empathy. Now, don't be too worried by this terrible list. These are the kinds of problems we all have. You'll find yourself doing these things, so notice yourself doing them and note the way in which they do or don't seem to prevent learning. But also accept that this is a part of the natural process of your own learning and your own development. And as your awareness and confidence grow, you'll find that you not only become more able to recognize such problems in your own teaching, but that you can also just start to find effective alternative options that enable rather than hinder learning. Well, how about you? I know that for me, over the course of my career, I have been victim to every one of these techniques. However, I can tell you that with some concentrated effort and focused attention, you'll be able to nip these in the bud in no time.